Britannia. Insularum quas Romanum.
Britain, the largest of the islands which Roman geography includes, is so situated that it faces Germany on the east, Spain on the west. On the south it is even within sight of Gaul. Its northern extremities, which have no shores opposite to them, are beaten by the waves of a vast open sea. For the ancient wayfarers who first came upon her secluded shores, England lay beyond the farthest reaches of civilization. Simple and resilient, Britain's first inhabitants, the Celts, formed an agrarian society on the fringe of the known world. Nearly 3,000 years after the great monoliths of Stonehenge arose above the Salisbury Plain, a tempest of change would sweep away the island's isolated past. A new and powerful force appeared on the horizons. Rome had arrived. The Roman fleet disembarked the imperial legions onto the shore, and with this group of soldiers came a prevailing mode of thought and an encompassing way of life. It embodied the heart and the soul of the Roman Empire. Romanitas was this identity. Even as Roman Britain fell, the spirit of Rome continued the conquest that the legions could not. This spirit knew no boundaries. After receiving a new lease on life with the arrival of Christianity, this spirit seeped into the invading Anglo-Saxons and into every facet of existence in Dark Age England. And with the Anglo-Saxons, this powerful, unhindered spirit, Romanitas, created an entity that was to become the English state. The Roman Empire was the single greatest power to exist in the world of antiquity. Its conquests ranged over the Pyrenees of the Iberian Peninsula to the river Danube in Germania, across the Mediterranean Sea to the sands of the Sahara, and finally, the Ultima Thule, the end of the earth, the land of the Britons. Across this vast expanse, stone by stone, roads were laid weaving out from the beating heart of Rome. It was the creation of ambitious men who rose from the legacy of Gaius Julius Caesar. These emperors were the executors of Roman rule. From them flowed not only political authority, but also a stream of religious and cultural power. As a polity, it incorporated a polyglot of cultures. Religious cults were largely tolerated. In fact, the state religion of the later empire was to come from one of these cults, that of Christianity. The rule of law guarded the rights of Roman citizens everywhere.
Illa vox et imploratio.
I am a Roman citizen. That appeal has often helped and even saved many a man among barbarians in the remotest lands.
Cicero. Roman rule embodied the centralization of power. Governors were appointed to provinces and were backed by the full might of the Roman military and the Senate. Literacy was a cultural hallmark of the empire. Particular emphasis was placed on providing a classical education for all Roman youth. This value created an educated citizenry which drove the progress of the empire. The immensity of Roman influence created a liquidity of thought never seen in any prior civilization. This intellectual reservoir overflowed from Rome to the frontiers of the land, and even across the seas. Romanitas created wide networks of trade and communication, and nourished the agrarian society of England, giving life first to Roman Britain, and eventually to an Anglo-Roman identity. The conquest of Britain presented an opportunity for the expansion of the Roman Empire. Britain lay not more than 20 miles from the tip of Gaul, and yet those very miles of stormy waters posed one of the greatest challenges to the Roman military. When the first Roman oars sliced through this frigid waterway in 55 BCE, the commander of the fleet was none other than Julius Caesar himself. Although Caesar's 7th and 10th legions did not make many physical inroads, his expeditions penetrated the mists of myth which had shrouded the British Isles from the light of Rome.
Forget not, Roman, that it is your special genius to rule the peoples, to impose the ways of peace, to spare the defeated, and to crush those proud men who will not submit.
Virgil, Aeneid. Armed with this mandate, Tiberius Claudius, fourth emperor of the Pax Romana, invaded the land of the Britons in 43 AD. His general Vespasian, and eventually Emperor Claudius himself, directed a multi-pronged attack on the native Britons. The fractious tribal resistance did little to impede the ruthlessly efficient legions.
Claudius won over numerous tribes, some on terms of surrender, others by force, and was saluted imperator.
Cassius Dio, Histories of Rome. The title of imperator was an honor given to Claudius by his troops, who hailed him as they would a victorious general. Once again, the emperor of Rome had brought her spirit new lands in which to wander. Within a short time, the Roman army controlled most of England. The island was integrated into the empire as the province of Britannia. The Britons now found themselves subject to the structures of Roman rule. The provincial capital was placed in Londinium, where the emperor's representatives, including the governor, resided. Britannia was divided into political units called civitates. Rome used the local Celtic aristocracy as a surrogate for its power, making tribal chieftains into members of the very councils that governed the civitates. The interests of the British elite were tied to the Roman order, and the inevitable result was a slow Romanization of the Britons. The tax system, a cornerstone of Roman rule, sustained Rome's many enterprises across the world. Collected from every town in the provinces, this tribute flowed, as the river Tiber, into the great treasury of Rome. Legionary forts dotted the province and secured the land against the rebellions of local tribes and the incursions of northern barbarians. Over years of campaigns, the emperors of Rome claimed more and more of Britain, from Barbari to the north. This frontier was the northernmost boundary of the Roman Empire. Along the craggy ridges of northern England, Emperor Hadrian erected the most expansive fortification of the empire. Stretching from coast to coast, the wall signified over 70 miles of stony resistance to the threatening uncivil hordes. The wall reflected the virtues of the Roman administration. It brought the order, security, and stability which allowed Romanitas to develop within the heart of Britain. The Roman presence was felt in many ways. One of the lasting impressions of a native Briton would have been of walking into one of the great Roman civitas capitals. There, men hailing from the darkest corners of Britain would lay their eyes on towering testaments to Roman architecture. Columns and arches greeted visitors with their grandiosity of both form and function. These public works followed the legions and took the form of amphitheaters, aqueducts, public baths, well-appointed housing, and a widespread network of public military roads. In addition to these civilian towns, many legionary settlements, or vici, emerged. Roman soldiers from across the empire gathered in one province. Indeed, 1/10 of the Roman military was stationed in Britain. Interactions with the native Britons were frequent and led to significant intermarriage. An examination of Vindolanda, a fort on Hadrian's Wall, provides a glimpse into the soldiers' daily lives. Here, tablets have been found portraying a vivid, bustling Roman life superimposed onto a British people. In many respects, life in Roman Britain differed little from life in Rome. One tablet even reveals a birthday invitation from one commander's wife to another. The Romans in Britain desired the same amenities to which they were accustomed in Rome. Thus, the large number of soldiers stationed on the island propelled a market economy and ensured that there existed a class of quality craftsmen and artists. The local industry grew as Romano-British tastes became more specialized. Metalwork and pottery flourished with the introduction of Roman techniques. Coinage was crucial to the development of a highly evolved economy and the incorporation of Britannia into the larger imperial system. These coins, which all Romans handled, prominently featured the profiles of the emperors. Social stratification in Britain followed the pattern found in the rest of the empire. A Roman elite joined with the native upper class, which had adjusted itself to Roman norms. British servants learned the Roman ways from their patrician masters. Thus, Romanized middle and lower classes appeared. The lower class, whose condition generally improved during the Roman period, lived in a less agrarian and more urban setting. A belief in the supernatural existed in Britain long before the Romans. However, the Romans brought with them a bevy of classical pagan gods that combined with the British animistic spirits to form a variety of Romano-Celtic religious cults. Temples to celebrate these gods were built across the province, from the one of Aquae Sulis at the Roman baths in Bath, to that at Maiden Castle, an Iron Age fort, to those along Hadrian's Wall in legionary fortresses. Even so, the imperial cult, which deified the emperor, lay at the center of religious worship. One such emperor was Constantine the Great. In 312, the Roman Emperor Constantine had a vision of God before a major battle in which he received the image of a cross of light bearing the words, "In this sign you will be victorious." Thereafter, Constantine's interpretation of the sign, in the form of the Greek letters chi and rho, after Christos, was born on the shields of the legions, and was found everywhere in the empire as the sign of the Christian faith. The following year, Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, an imperial decree recognizing the legality of Christianity. The emperor sought to consolidate his power, and in Christianity's monotheism, which was compatible with traditional Roman beliefs, he found his answer. The joining of empire and church was to engender the first forms of Christendom, where the potentate and head of church, and even the Roman emperor and Christ, were one. In setting the date of birth of Christ to the day of the sun god, December 25th, Constantine accommodated the synthesis of pagan and Christian becoming prevalent across the empire. In Roman Britain, Christianity entered through the upper class. For example, the inhabitants of the Lullingstone Roman villa created perhaps the first Christian shrine in Britain. The power with which the arrival of Christianity was felt can be seen, for example, at Vindolanda. There, in the very heart of the fort, builders sacrificed Roman architectural convention, ordered, rectangular, and efficient, to the unusual imposition of the chapel's apsidal, semicircular construction. This demonstration of Christian faith is found all across Britain. A great transformation had begun. Romanitas had now found a theological vessel that would preserve it against the fall of Rome itself. Britannia had proven to be a true heir to Rome in its law and administration, economic system, urban culture, and religious practices. However, the ties between Britain and Rome would be tested. Would their fates intertwine, or would fate intervene? In the end, the Roman presence in Britain was not to remain. It was only fitting that the British province would be wrenched from Roman hands just as Rome itself was succumbing to barbarian forces. For the fall of Roman Britain was precipitated in a similar manner, stemming from the use of Germanic tribes, the Angles, Saxons, and Utes, by the Romano-British to defend against northern barbarians, the Picts. Most likely, envy led the Germanic tribes to depose their well-heeled paymasters, the Romano-British authority. As one official wrote to the council in Rome, pleading for help,
Repellunt barbari.
The barbarians push us to the sea pushes us back on the barbarians. Between these two kinds of death, we are either drowned or slaughtered.
Gildas, de Excidio Britanniae. Thus it was that the Roman figures in Britain were largely displaced. The Emperor Honorius, hard-pressed at home, could lend no aid to the Britons, and at AD 410, Roman rule in the Isles fell. For the next 150 years, these barbarians continued to arrive, forming an Anglo-Saxon society in southern and eastern Britain. Despite this fall of a temporal Rome to the fires of change, an eternal Rome persisted in the ether of a German Valhalla. The Roman spirit lived on, in many ways and many aspects, but most of all, as an identity, as Romanitas. The years of this transition between Roman and Anglo-Saxon marked the development of many Romanized institutions that would continue through to Anglo-Saxon times. Between 410, the official end of Roman Britain, and 597, the arrival of the Roman Church, Romanitas clung to the land in religious and political arenas. The depredations of the Anglo-Saxon invasion on the easternmost states of Roman Britain led to a sudden and considerable displacement of the native Romano-Britons. A dispossessed aristocracy, along with the dependent lower classes, fled westward to escape the rapacious Saxons. These refugees abandoned the familiarity of their homeland for the security of distance from the Germanic tribes. They brought with them not only their personal sense of Romanitas, but also a religion. The patricians, in particular, carried with them a belief that they had adopted in the centers of Roman thought in the East: Christianity. The general westward movement of the Romano-British affected the development of a Christian Ireland.
The Celtic Church is a direct continuation of the church that was here in Roman Britain. I'm sure that there was Christian continuity, at least going right the way through.
The advent of Celtic Christianity is typically credited to St. Patrick. His remarkable work on the island helped convert most of the Irish by 500. A more organized Christian order materialized in place of the pagan Druid religion. A respect for nature, love of mysticism, and an emphasis on monasticism characterized the Celtic Church that spread throughout Ireland. Since no central administrative power emerged, the nature of Celtic Christianity remained personalized, driven by the will of individual evangelists. Like many other Christians, the Irish perceived conversion of others as a duty to God. Accordingly, they sent out several prominent clerics to Christianize the English, encircling Anglo-Saxon England with Christian lands. Saint Columba, the most important Irish missionary of the time, founded the monastery of Iona in 563 in northern England. This center of Christian influence would hold sway over the northern Anglo-Saxon kings for years to come, in lending the English various facets of Roman identity through Latinized monasticism and the power of the Church. The Irish would play an important role in sustaining Romanitas in Anglo-Saxon England. It seems that those Romano-Britons, not directly impacted by the Saxon incursions, were able to maintain a somewhat, though reduced, Roman society.
Most of these princes continued to take Romanized names. Many of them, Tudoric is a Welsh version of Theodoric, and they took their names from the great Roman rulers so that their power was associated with Roman power. So we can say that they probably modelled many of their structures on the imperial Roman court.
The great gymnasium in the heart of urban Virconium remained occupied for some time after the disintegration of Roman power in Britain, but fell into disuse by the end of the 5th century. As Romans were replaced by Anglo-Saxons, much of physical Roman Britain disappeared.
Ratlich is des Whalestan, Weirde Jebrakon, Borgstede Borstan, Brosnath and
The city buildings fell apart, the works of giants crumble. Tumbled are the towers, ruined the roofs, and broken the barred gate. Frost in the plaster, all the ceilings gape, torn and collapsed and eaten up by age. And grit holds in its grip the hard embrace of earth, the dead departed master builders, until 100 generations now of people have passed by.
The Anglo-Saxon conquerors had maintained their own societal structure. They brought Germanic customs with them to the Isles. Among these was the concept of kingship. Historical records, such as Tacitus's Germania, demonstrate that the institution of kingship truly belonged to the fabric of Germanic culture. On the continent, rulers drew their lineage from the very gods whom they worshipped, like Woden and Thor. The powers such tribal stations held were founded on the Germanic rite of divine descent, in which kings were the mediators between gods and the people. It was for this reason, in part, that the office of kingship was to become the most effective vehicle for the conversion of England. Although early Anglo-Saxon political structure may seem to have been anarchical, there was in fact an organization present. Recent scholarship suggests that there was significant continuity between Roman and Anglo-Saxon administrative units. Thus, even as the highest level of Roman provincial government disappeared, a lower level of civitas structure subsisted as territories, each of which contained a center of power, often a medieval estate that descended from the Roman villa. The territorial system points to a direct influence from late Roman times. Certainly, the kingdoms lacked in cohesiveness, but within each subkingdom there remained Roman boundaries and infrastructure. By the late 6th century, territorial leaders began to fashion themselves as kings. Certain princely burial mounds contain rich, even imported, treasures that represent the growing influence of the Anglo-Saxon royalty. Beneath these rulers there stood the earliest form of feudalism. Warriors, or thanes, fought for their patron prince, while the lower class of churls supplied the kingdom with labor and goods. Slavery, just as in the Roman Empire, provided the backbone of the agrarian working class.
So becomes it a youth to quit him well with his father's friends, by fee and gift, that to aid him aged in after days, come warriors willing, should war draw nigh, liegemen loyal. By lauded deeds shall an earl have honor in every clan.
At the pinnacle of this stratification was the Bretwalda, or the Overking, under whom ruled the other subject kings. Akin to the Roman emperors, the Overking could only attain power and respect through military conquest, and thus he controlled most of the 7 major Anglo-Saxon kingdoms: Kent, East Anglia, Sussex, Wessex, Mercia, Bernicia, and Deira. The end of the 6th century saw the consolidation of this heptarchy. Anglo-Saxon kings, although borrowing from Germanic prototypes, employed the residual Roman civil forms to attain positions loftier than those of the most ambitious German prince. Thus, before Roman Christianity arrived, the Anglo-Saxon kings had become conscious of the island's Roman past and of their position as heirs to Roman emperors. Romanitas, as a fluid component of their identity, not only contributed to the creation of the Overking, but also became entwined with the fate of the Anglo-Saxon state. Rolling across the dark seas, a spiritual wave carried a small boat full of men of the cloth with the cross, glowing with a holy light. The illuminating mission freed the Angles from the chains of forlorn despair. The second coming of Rome was characterized by persuasion rather than force, by the cross of the priest rather than the gladius of the legionary. But like those who had come centuries before, these missionaries bore the imperial purple of Rome. The mission to evangelize England began with an encounter in a Roman market between Pope Gregory and an Angle slave boy. In the heathenism of this fair-haired angel, Gregory perceived a divine directive. The realization of Gregory's vision began with a landing in 597 of St. Augustine and his band of priests near Canterbury, the capital of Kent, a kingdom ruled by the pagan Ethelbert. The first encounter between pagan and Roman Christian was a theater of diplomacy, an open-air theater to be exact. Ethelbert insisted upon meeting the Christian delegation outdoors, as he feared their supposed magical powers. Under pressure from the Pope, his wife, who was a Christian princess from Francia, and the threat of Frankish hostility, Ethelbert himself was baptized.
If you read the pages of Bede, the impression they make on me is of the Roman missionaries displaying all of the grandeur of the civilization that they brought with them. They processed through the streets of Canterbury, bearing their cross with their books and their images and their silver and heaven knows what. They must have made an enormous impression with the wealth of their civilization, with the trappings of everything that they represented and stood for.
The king endowed the missionaries with legitimacy, giving them the 4th century Roman Church of St. Martin, and enacted codified law to accord them legal protections and land charters. This deference to the Roman mode was likely influenced by his own sense of Romanitas, arising out of the Roman ruins that populated his kingdom.
The famous fate and storms beat these rocky cliffs. Falling frost fetters the earth, the harbinger of winter. Then dark comes. Night shadows deepen. From the north there comes a rough hailstorm in malice against men. All is troublesome in this earthly kingdom. The turn of events changes the world under the heavens. Here money is fleeting. Here friend is fleeting. Here man is fleeting. Here kinsman is fleeting. All the foundation of this world turns to waste.
A general sense of melancholy permeated Anglo-Saxon society, in contrast to the traditional Germanic gods, which gave no doctrine of an afterlife. The Christian creed offered meaning and hope to the temporal existence of mankind. Tales of the miracles and wisdom of Augustine's pious men spread quickly. Bede, an ecclesiastical historian from the 8th century, reports that Augustine had converted 10,000 Anglo-Saxons by Christmas Day that same year. In a pattern that was to follow all across England, Ethelbert, the local ruler, endorsed the spread of this literate and paternal religion and the emergence of an English Christendom. A prime example of this was Ethelbert's sponsorship of King Redwald of East Anglia for baptism. In converting, Redwald acknowledged Ethelbert's status not only as an overking, but also as a sacral intermediary between his kingdom and God. This act allowed the conversion to spread into East Anglia. In 616, following the death of Ethelbert, Redwald ascended to the overkingship. Interestingly, he placed both pagan and Christian gods in his altar, covering his bases in case one or the other was wrong. The royal burial mounds at Suttonhoo likely housed the earthly possessions of Redwald. Many of the artifacts found display a marked connection to imperial and Christian Rome, and are not found anywhere in Germanic records. Buried in this kingly grave are personal effects that paint a picture of a distinctly Roman dress. The helmet was crafted using Roman techniques. The decorative panels that adorn it depict heroic scenes of battling Germanic warriors. Modern scholarship at the British Museum attests that one panel shows a mounted warrior trampling a fallen enemy, a theme handed down from the Roman Empire. The shoulder clasps are based on Roman prototypes fashionable in 5th century Britain, and display intricate, curvilinear patterns that come from Celtic artistic tradition. The belt buckle is elegantly manufactured and exemplifies an extravagance characteristic of Roman upper class. This standard is perhaps the most unusual item in the collection, in drawing on the natural majesty of the stag, which derives from Germanic tradition. It is clear that the owner intended for it to impress those who beheld it. A clear link can be drawn from this natural symbol of strength to that of the Aquila, the eagle standard borne by the Roman legions. These shallow bowls were decorated with an equal-armed cross, an unmistakable mark of Christianization. The spoons evince more Christian themes, the Greek words of Saul and Paul indicating that these were christening spoons. Based on the many items which possess Roman themes and elements, it becomes quite clear that this king, probably Redwald, drew upon divine and secular symbols from the Roman Church to the Roman Empire to enhance his position. In doing so, he was affirming his own part of a psychical connection to the memory of Rome. Redwald's death created a power void. Eventually, King Edwin of Northumbria filled this vacuum, but only after a struggle that lasted for many years. Earlier in his life, Edwin had been exiled from the north by pagan kings, and he took shelter at Redwald's court. There, he allied himself with the southern Christian kings. But even after Edwin regained his kingship of Northumbria upon Redwald's death, his kingdom remained pagan. It took an event on Easter in 626 to change Edwin's mind. While he was holding court, a messenger from a rival West Saxon state sought and gained permission to hold an audience with the king. Upon appearing in the court, the treacherous agent lunged at Edwin with a poisoned short sword. According to Bede, it was Edwin's dearest thane who interposed himself, saving the life of the king. Edwin attributed his survival to the grace of the Christian God. To test the power of this God, Edwin marched on the West Saxons. The summer of that year, Edwin destroyed his rivals in the name of Christ, not unlike a distinguished predecessor of his, Roman Emperor Constantine. Roman Christianity's fate on this final English frontier was decided in a conference of royal advisors and counselors in the winter. In Bede's ecclesiastical history, Edwin's pagan priest is the foremost proponent of conversion. As he argues,
Talis mihi videtur rex, vita hominum presens in terris.
My Lord, although we cannot know the mysteries of the afterlife, the span of time we spend on earth appears to me to be like this. Imagine sitting in your hall in winter, feasting with your chiefs and counselors, your faces glowing from flames that crackle in the hearth. Outside, the wintry night is lashed by winds and driving rain and snow. Suddenly, a sparrow darts in through a door, flits across the hall, and flies out through another one. Inside, cocooned in light and warmth, it can enjoy a moment's calm before it vanishes, rejoining the freezing night from which it came. Such is our journey through this life. But as to what's in store for us beyond the doors of birth and death, we are completely in the dark. If this new doctrine can offer hope for something more, by all means, let us embrace it.
Merito esse sequenda videtur.
This stunning exposition in favor of Christianity confirmed the essential value of the religion to the English. It represented the triumph of the God of light and truth over the author of darkness and despair. Edwin proceeded to convert many of his subordinate kings and marched throughout his kingdom preceded by a Roman imperial standard. New generations of Roman Christian kings built upon the existing Romano-German ties. The recent excavation of the Prittlewell Prince shows this evolution clearly.
So there's a secondary layer of Roman influence coming in then, and when you get Christianization, of course, you've got the direct hotline to Rome, and you see that very clearly in Prittlewell. I think those gold crosses are Italian. I think the folding stool from that grave is Italian. I think the Byzantine vessels that you see in that grave are coming from Italy, and they're all to do with the missionary conversion process. That's the hotline to Rome that you're seeing coming in the 7th century.
Through the office of kingship and the pedestal of religion, Romanitas had inextricably bound itself to the fate of England. The Celtic Church that had established itself to the northern and western fringe of what had been Roman Britain now actively pursued the conversion of England. While the waters of Augustine's second wave of Roman Christianity receded due to political struggles, this first wave that had been established by the Romans 300 years ago proved to be equally effective at spreading the Christian tenets amid the Anglo-Saxon principates. Celtic Christianity had survived and developed its own idiosyncrasies, separated as it was for centuries from the centers of Roman Christian belief. Yet, in its hands lay the very soul of England. The Celtic Christian monastery of Iona, founded in 563, continued to exert enormous influence over the northern kingdoms, and in fact even converted Oswald, the son of Edwin's pagan predecessor. When Oswald succeeded Edwin in 633, he invited St. Aidan, a Celtic priest, to come to his kingdom and spread the Christian message among his people. Aidan became counselor to Oswald and the popular envoy of Christianity. His gentle determination and his ascetic virtue were archetypal of the monastic way of life led by the Irish and fundamentally Roman missionaries. When Oswald allowed Aidan to found a monastery off the coast of Northumbria in 635, he brought about the creation of the holiest site in Anglo-Saxon England. The holy island of Lindisfarne typified the Celtic style of Christianity, one of solitude and self-discipline.
Leave me alone with God as much as may be, as a tide draws the waters close in upon the shore. Make me an island set apart, alone with you, God, holy to you.
Chosen for its proximity to the Northumbrian capital of Bamborough, The Holy Island nurtured a growth of Christian spirit in the northern kingdoms. The Celtic Aidan journeyed through the kingdom, converting the pagan Anglo-Saxons in large numbers. This conversion soon became embroiled in the conflict between the Roman and Celtic Christian churches. Most famously, the Celtic Christian king Oswiu was celebrating Easter at the same time that his Roman Christian wife was keeping Lent. Consequently, King Oswiu hosted the Synod of Whitby at St. Hild Abbey in 664, poised on a cliff overlooking the North Sea. It was there, among the congregated representatives of both Christian cults, that the brand of Christianity was to be decided. Would the Celtic priests deny their Roman roots? Would England sever its ties from the very ideals upon which it was founded?
For us, it might seem just a trivial thing about calendars, but in fact, calendars were such an important thing in those days. If they couldn't even agree on the day in which to celebrate the major Christian feast, which is Easter, so how could they have, a one-only church in their country? And the king was the one who seems, the king of Northumbria seems to be the one who was in the end involved in choosing between the two systems. At least this is the way in which Bede describes the event. When they heard the Celtic side and the Roman side, and in the end the king was brought to choose the Roman side.
From that point on, Celtic Christianity altered its ways to conform to the Roman standard. Lindisfarne itself had to change as well. St. Cuthbert succeeded St. Aidan as Bishop of Lindisfarne, and aided both the pastors and the parishioners in changing from Celtic to Roman Christianity. Throughout this process, the Anglo-Saxons could not avoid feeling a renewed sense of Romanitas. The Lindisfarne Gospels, produced on the island in the 8th century, is one of the most remarkable examples of book illumination in medieval Europe and shows the Church's emphasis on education. Its intricate designs, mixed with the Christian Gospels, represent the high level of education available in Anglo-Saxon England. Its artists merged Roman, Celtic, and Germanic elements to create an original form of insular art. In this portrait of St. John, one can see that the artist has misspelled the Latin word for eagle, aquila, perhaps to preserve the Roman attribute of symmetry. The interlacing curves and curvilinear patterns were found throughout the Roman Empire and developed by the Celts during the Iron Age. The animal imagery used to depict these Christian themes came from Germanic tradition. Art was an intimate part of the artist's identity. Thus, as Romanitas was present in the art, so it was present in the artist's soul. The advent of Christianity in England fostered the growth of education and literacy. The Roman Empire had brought the first schools with it in an effort to maintain a classical education. But when St. Augustine arrived with his monks in 597, he reported that none of those original schools remained in the Anglo-Saxon system. It took the Church to bring back this integral part of the Roman identity. Because of this religious inclination, the nature of learning tended towards Latin rather than the English vernacular, and thus formed a second permanent connection with Romanitas. The monastic schools of Wearmouth and Jarrow are noteworthy demonstrations of this development of scholarship and growth of the faith. They provided the firm intellectual and spiritual foundation from which the Christianization of northern England could be undertaken. It was here at Jarrow that the young Venerable Bede studied precious texts from Rome, and where he would be molded into the great ecclesiastical historian of his time. The Christian schools in England gained a reputation of excellence, which was confirmed when their halls yielded the great scholar Alcuin. Born in 735, Alcuin was educated at the Cathedral School of York and spent the first 40 years of his life in England. On a visit to Rome in 780, he befriended Charlemagne, the great Frankish emperor, and later took charge of bringing Latin learning and culture from the Anglo-Saxons to the Franks.
The contacts he made and the people he taught had this incredible influence, so that you name some important politician stroke intellectual in the 9th century, and they almost certainly were either taught by Alcuin or were taught by somebody who'd been taught by Alcuin. If you do a little sort of intellectual family tree, it includes just about the entire elite.
Through this teaching, Alcuin helped make the Anglo-Saxon state into not only a cultivator, but also a conveyor of Romanitas. And that in itself was a Roman ideal. The Anglo-Saxons built upon the classical Roman foundations to form a unique identity. As one can see at Dover, it is the 3 Roman arches that provide a base for the elaborated Anglo-Saxon lighthouse. Generally, the Romans had bequeathed a bipartite patrimony to England: literacy and centralization. Literacy applied to the politics of the late Anglo-Saxon state and its creation of law codes. Codified law is widely seen as among the significant legacies of the Roman Empire. In the case of England, it acted as the conceptual framework for Germanic substance. The 2 greatest influences on the codification of law in Anglo-Saxon England were Roman and ecclesiastical, the Empire and the Christian Church. Before the Germanic tribes were converted, they had possessed no known written code, and the formulation of such codes was the result of a need to accommodate the Church and its institutions. This was the case with King Ethelbert of Kent, who had drawn up charters transferring possession of domains and rights to protections unto the mission of St. Augustine. Christian scholars actively promoted ecclesiastical centralization. The Church was uncomfortable with dependency on oral tradition, preferring the stability and security of the written word. One later Anglo-Saxon king echoed such sentiments, saying, "What the memory of man lets slip, the circumspection in letters preserves." With respect to imperial influences, Bede explicitly refers to the earliest Anglo-Saxon laws in the Kingdom of Kent being Juxta Exemple Romanorum, or according to the Roman example. Although the Roman laws were at times studied in the spirit of scholarly endeavor, they served more as a source of inspiration for the kings of Anglo-Saxon England.
Lawmaking was a Roman thing. The idea of a ruler having the obligation to issue laws because he was like a Roman and because he was Christian, because he was like an Old Testament leader. I think that was what was in Ethelbert's mind.
Political institutions in England developed significantly, most notably during the reign of King Offa of Mercia, who ascended to the throne in 757. Charters since discovered reveal his position of over-kingship, and a marked shift away from kindred-centered lordship to territorial lordship, centralized about the sacred and secular axes of kingly powers. This charter was drawn by an under-king in the 8th century. When Offa took over his kingdom, however, the charter required new authorization. One can observe Offa's approval on the reverse side. His military aptitude ensured the security of this kingdom, best witnessed in his creation of Offa's Dyke, longer in fact than Hadrian's Wall, separating the Welsh from the English. He dealt with Charlemagne on even footing, and was even host to papal delegations at a great council in 786. This was no longer a federation of states, but a coherent community. Recognition of communal obligations, such as the common defense, represented a conceptual step forward in the English political science. Systems of taxation emerged as more structured form of the tribute-giving demanded by Germanic culture, and were in their own right a more Roman execution of powers. The territorial under-kings began to develop prerogatives harkening back to those held in Roman times by local rulers. The over-king of the earlier times had become a Rex Totius Anglorum Patriae, king of all the homeland of the English. Offa issued the first proper coinage of English history. In one of his earliest coins, one can observe the presence of the Roman imperial diadem on his head. One dare say that Offa looks more dashing than several of the Roman emperors themselves. On the obverse side, there is a scene well known in Roman culture: the suckling of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome. Such an expression of Romanitas from such an influential king is a remarkable sign of how much the Anglo-Saxons valued their Roman past. Many of the later kings portrayed themselves in a similar manner, fancying themselves as heirs to the Roman legacy. These coins, like those from Roman times, would have been handled in the marketplaces across the land. With the return of domestic trade, the old Roman roads, which stretched from London to York, were used frequently by Anglo-Saxon merchants. Urbanization had made a comeback as well, with towns gradually increasing in their size and function. 3 cultural vectors produced the structure of law and order of Anglo-Saxon England, and were Roman, Christian, and Germanic. The 8th century Coppergate helmet, found in York, displays all of these elements, and is another example of the Roman presence in Anglo-Saxon kingship.
In terms of a good helmet, that is a stunning design. This is a Roman, if you take a legionary helmet or a Greek helmet with these cheek pieces, and a smaller nose guard, and then look at this one in the 8th and 8th century, it's actually very, very similar in terms of the way it looks. You've got steel plates, we've got copper alloy and silver for the trim and the decoration, and then you can see the cast animal head and the quite intricate interlaced decoration. This is a continuation of Roman ideas and design. Why invent something new when it works perfectly well? Putting this on gives you a certain amount of elite status within your society, and if you believe any of the writings in Bede and various other people, they were trying to recreate that great empire, nation state, whatever it is. So I'm sure the wearer of this was a member of an elite, within society, and what is the biggest, what is the most substantial, stunning eliteness you can possibly think of in the last 400 years in this guy's eyes? Oh, the Roman Empire.
The balance of power in Anglo-Saxon England had shifted from Northumbria in the 7th century to Mercia in the 8th century. After the end of Offa's rule in Mercia in 796, Wessex usurped the throne of the Saxon Heptarchy. Thus began a dynasty of forceful leadership in England. Using the political structure built by previous kings, future heads of state would enhance an imperial spirit. Spurred on by Romanitas, an English identity was beginning to emerge. The great house of Wessex would unify Anglo-Saxon England once and for all. King Alfred the Great is the only English king ever to lay claim to the title. He stands in the royal pantheon as a ruler honored for lasting contributions to kingdom and Christendom. The story of Alfred's accession to the throne began when he was but a young lad. Sent on a pilgrimage to Rome by his father, 4-year-old Alfred was hosted by the Pope himself. There, he was not only confirmed by the Holy Father and adopted as a godchild, but he was given an honorary appointment as a Roman consul.
Any little boy going from the west of England to Rome in the middle of the 9th century is going to be transfixed, hugely impressed, deeply awed by the monuments that he would see around him in Rome. About what kind of impression could this have made on a 4-year-old boy or a 6-year-old boy? He was there twice, and I didn't have a little boy of my own in those days. I didn't realise quite how receptive boys of that age can be to these, to new impressive surroundings. When he became king in 871, he would have remembered everything that he had seen in Rome. He would be aware of it. He would know that that's what the Pope represented. He would see. He would associate what he could remember with the authority of Rome, with the authority of the Pope, with the example of the Pope. I think it would all have a powerful impact on clearly an impressionable and intelligent little boy.
This confirmation of the child Alfred into the church was a dramatic induction not only into the Christian religious order, but also into the Roman order of years past. Alfred's ascendancy to kingship was improbable at the very least. A frail child, Alfred grew up with aspirations to the priesthood. He had 3 elder brothers and probably never envisioned himself as king. Once his brothers died prematurely in battle, however, Alfred was left holding the reins of the army. Thus it was by the time he was 22, Alfred controlled the West Saxon state, which had dominion over Wales and Mercia, but was facing continuous pressure from the Danish Vikings. The Vikings were barbarian raiders who first made their presence felt in 783 when they sacked the monastery of Lindisfarne. Now they had returned, looking to conquer all of England. In 878, the Danish leader Guthrum led an incisive attack upon Alfred's forces. The Danes swooped down upon a royal stronghold where Alfred was staying, destroying its defenses and scattering its people. Alfred and a band of followers barely escaped, making their way across the woods and swamps to prepare for revenge. Within 6 months, the showdown had arrived. At the Battle of Edington, Alfred's troops won in a decisive fashion, causing Guthrum and his retinue to surrender. Exemplifying the age-old practice of kingly sponsorship, Alfred forced them to accept a Christian baptism. After chasing the Danes east and west, north and south, checking their every advance, Alfred finally vanquished them in 896. Under his authority lay all of England, except for the Danish enclaves of Northumbria and East Anglia. The long-fought struggle against the Danes had driven the Anglo-Saxons to present a unified front against a common enemy. Harnessing this impetus, Alfred was able to generate a framework for rule in which he could consolidate executive power and authority. The urban culture that was central to Romanitas enjoyed a revival over the reign of the Anglo-Saxon kings. The Charter Burgul Hidaj laid out a centralized system in which tens of fortified places called burhs, often towns, were linked to form a defensive network. This scheme was the first stepping stone in a paradigm shift away from localized administration to a broader, more uniform means of governance. The policy proved its worth, as many burhs prospered afterward as centers of commerce and culture. And in kind, this aggregation of wealth allowed Alfred to effect a centralized system of taxation, similar to that of Roman times. The stability afforded by this policy further enabled Alfred to pursue a national uniform code of law. Alfred's work was notable in that it reconciled the diverse legal traditions of the Isle into a single English legal code. He called himself King of the English and held that the authority of a king should rest not only upon arbitration by force, but also justice. Naturally, religion played a crucial role in Alfred's life. His early foundation in the church shaped in Alfred's mind a sense of Roman heritage. In many ways, his life resembled that of King David. He was the right arm of the Church of God. He saw himself as a Roman king in the religious and, by extension, the political sphere. Alfred's close relationship with the church and its ecclesiastical scholarship led him to emphasize education. In the aftermath of the war, Alfred sought to rebuild the monastic networks of learning that had been devastated by the Danish incursions. He personally translated several Christian works from Latin to the Old English vernacular. In doing so, he made these religious texts, ranging from Boethius's Consolation on Philosophy to Bede's Ecclesiastical History of the English People, more accessible to the Anglo-Saxon lay people.
He also speaks specifically of the lay people, those for whom it is enough to teach just Old English, but at least to be able to read and write and understand those books that they were translating. And so I've always found very interesting that at that point you have a specific interest in the education of the lay aristocratic people, that only with Alfred, at the time of Alfred, becomes such an important priority, such an important task.
Alfred firmly believed that those who governed could only do so as literate, educated men. He established a court school for the nobility, importing scholars from all across Europe, much as the Frankish king Charlemagne had once done. He saw himself, the king, as an educator. As he writes in his preface to a translation of Pope Gregory's Pastoral Care,
"It seems better to me that all the free-born young men now in England may be set to learning until the time that they can read English writings properly. Thereafter one may instruct in Latin those whom one wishes to teach."
Beset by foreign invaders who had conquered half the country, he formed noble ideals, ones which were distinctly Roman and which were to endure.
To what does a man owe fidelity, if not his fatherland? We are fellow citizens by a twofold relationship, sons of one city in Christ and natives of one country.
Alcuin, the great scholar of Anglo-Saxon times. The ideal of kingship would remain the aspiration for a polity in which the king harnessed the loyalties of secular lordship and the faith of the church, an ideal that would, with time, form the heart of the early English nation. Beginning with Alfred's grandson, all successors to the throne would be crowned king of all England. The seed of English leadership had been nurtured by the waters of the classical Roman world. The legacy of the empire was found not just in its great ruins, the work of giants, but in the source of its inspiration, the ideas that drove Roman hegemony and were central to its civilization.
I think in general people have, it's often been a fairly sort of nationalistic thing to try to stress one particular period over another, to try to stress, for example, the Anglo-Saxon period here, or in Germany stress the German Empire, or whatever it is. I think you have to take a very long view to look at culture as a whole, to look at things that different periods have in common. And I think you should also be looking at continuities, at things that which bind people together. And we perhaps are looking at a continuous story and not a sort of broken up series of episodes.
What was at one point a collection of disparate tribes had been brought together over the course of many centuries under a single banner. They had learned to understand and express themselves in the written word, a defining cultural leap. The duality of Romanitas, through continuity and renewal, through Roman Britain and Roman Christianity, elevated the Anglo-Saxons out of the darkness of destruction and existential chaos toward the brilliant heights of a new empire. The waves of Romanitas reflected this light and surrounded England with the sparkling waters of Rome. Romanitas had given birth to this kingdom, had contributed to a culture that would persist long after the dark ages of England and the fall of the Roman Empire.